hope that people, okay, I'll start again. Good morning and welcome to the Centre for Brexit Studies event, where we're looking at sort of the impact of Brexit on higher education. As part of the introduction, I suppose I should give some indication of what Brexit is, but I think most people will know that as a result and consequence of a referendum held 5 years ago in late June 2016, we eventually left the EU in early 2000, just before the pandemic, after the election that Boris Johnson had held. And Boris Johnson features very large in all of this, so we all know the politics, but of course quite clearly Brexit has a massive impact in terms of relationships, in particularly business. But of course one of the big issues that came up during the referendum campaign was indeed the freedom of movement. And I speak personally as somebody who grew up in the 1970s, and there was a great deal of excitement about the fact that we would be able to travel much more freely. That was the cherished ambition, which of course became part of the EU when the UK joined what was the European Economic Community, the EEC. It was very much an economic project, but it became much greater than that. And of course, part of what the social aspect of any society is education. And I think that one of the great aspects of the EU was the ability of students from all parts of the or member countries. And of course, as we know, the EU has expanded in recent years, certainly as a result of accession in 2004. So any student, well, any person could travel freely, but of course the big benefit as far as higher education was concerned was that students could move from one institution to another and could do part of the degree in one place and part of the degree in another place. And dare I say, as somebody who enjoys traveling, that I think has been one of the great benefits of being a member or being part of the EU. But unfortunately, of course, as I said a couple of moments ago, one of the things that has happened is that we had a referendum, a non-binding referendum. We won't get into that because the government didn't have to leave, but of course it was made pretty clear that they would do so. And of course, the other thing that we did do is we had a very hard Brexit, which has impacted upon trade relationships. But most particularly, and with direct relevance to today, what that has meant is we've left the schemes such as Erasmus, which was the body which allowed students to travel freely to avail of education, and indeed EU students paid the same fees as British students. So as I say, we've lost that aspect, and that is what we're going to examine today. We've got three eminent speakers, not in this order, I should say. I'm reading from the bios, I should add, Leslie Budd and Vangelis Tsiligiris. And as I say, what I'm going to do is, rather than go on, because of course I could talk about Brexit all day, because I've been a member of the Centre for Brexit Studies for the last couple of years and written very extensively. I'd much prefer the speakers to get into their stride, because of course they're the experts in terms of higher education. So what I will do, if that's okay with everyone, I'll introduce the first of our speakers, and it is actually the first one up today is Vangelis Tsiligiris, who's an associate professor at Nottingham Business School at Nottingham Trent University and visiting professor of Birmingham City University. He's had 20 years of academic leadership, research and teaching experience in higher education. His research is on transnational education, models of international higher education and digital business education. He's founder of the T&E Hub, an international network of researchers and practitioners in transnational education. He's conducted research projects for international organisations such as the British Council, NAFSA, and the Association of Commonwealth Universities, and acted as a consultant for government bodies in Malta, Greece, and Georgia. And so without further ado, I'll hand over to Vangelis.
Okay, thanks a lot, and thanks for having me, and thanks for the introduction. Let me share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you are able to see my slide there. Okay, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to aim to provide some insights as to what potentially is the impact of Brexit on higher education, on the UK higher education sector. And I will do that by reflecting on some of the available data. So there is three things really I'm looking at here: is the undergraduate market, the overall market, and the research side. So for the undergrad market, I've collected some data from UCAS, looking at the latest available data for the June 2021 deadline. So that is the latest available. So what we see here is that there was a tipping point around 2016 where the EU market of undergraduate applicants to the UK higher education institutions started to flatten, and obviously that has worsened quite a lot in the past year or so. This big decline, obviously, between 2020 and 21 is not because of Brexit. Is, I would assume, it has been accelerated because of Brexit, but it's also the impact of COVID and all the other things. Interestingly enough, at the same time, for the non-EU market, we see that point in time, 2016, the market to start taking off. And eventually between 19 and 2021, we see a quite big increase in the applicants for undergraduate courses from non-EU countries. So it looks like, first of all, obviously, historically, the undergraduate market from EU countries, it was not a substantial part of the higher education market in the UK. So it was not like the key market that will drive the financial side of things, but it was a very important component, and it still is a very important component, as this was generating quite a lot of other benefits, like most of the students will continue on and do masters or PhDs, very likely to become academics. And, you know, personal reflection, I'm one of these cases who, you know, I came in the country in 1995, and then I continue on and I live here. So although it is not a substantial part of the market, is a very valuable part because it generates quite a lot of added value. So we see that clearly being impacted by Brexit, and I would say that is also accelerated by other factors. Is the broader, I think, impact on the reputation of the UK as a country that is friendly to EU students. I think that is the key problem at the moment. And this is probably why we see this big increase, a big drop in 2020-21. So it was the impact of Brexit. This has been postponed for a while with all the extension of the EU student status up until 2020. But I think it was the overall handling of the pandemic that added this, in addition to the broader negativity about the reputation of the UK as a friendly place for EU students. Now, I looked into this data more in more details, and what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to look at each of the top 20 source countries from within EU and what have been the overall market trends. So obviously, clearly what we see here is that the compound annual rate of growth for the period between 2006 and 2015, so that period of time that appears to be a more normal one where the market was going upwards, it was about a 6% overall year-on-year increase. So that is the average annual increase in, if you like, in that part of the curve. So if you combine this, if you set this as the benchmark, then you see which countries were above or beyond that benchmark. So you have some countries growing at a faster pace. For instance, Romania is a good case there. That is, it has grown substantially between 2006 and 2015. Bulgaria is another one. The Czech Republic, Hungary, Spain, Italy, and then you have the more mature countries where you see also some other offering happening in country like transnational education, Cyprus, for instance, and Greece. And of course, you have other countries like Ireland who have been already at a very high point, and for them you see actually a minor decrease. Of course, that proves the point that there's almost no country where there's almost one country, Ireland, that stayed the same, but all the other countries have declined after 2016. So clearly there has been something there that has impacted the mobility of students, undergraduate students from these countries. Again, some countries have shown a higher decrease, other a lower decrease. I think what we can make out of this story is that traditional countries, sending countries to the UK for certain segments of the market, like France or Spain, will continue to be source countries for undergraduate students because there are certain segments of that markets that can afford and they are willing to go to the UK and study. Whereas other markets where access was as part of the EU membership, and access meant that probably less advantaged part of the society were able to access good quality education through these EU status. They would not be able to do so. So therefore you have obviously more decrease in these countries like Romania, Poland, Bulgaria, and Lithuania. Now, on the other side, what I've looked for is what is actually the non-EU source countries look like. And in order not to overcomplicate things with the numbers here, what I'm interested to see is that whether there's any particular country dominating the mobility here. And a couple of things we can make out of this is that India is becoming a key source country, a non-EU for undergraduate students in the UK, with a substantial increase between 2016 and 2021. So it used to be fourth in 2016, now is the second top source country. United States of America, we have some countries that have decreased their position, Hong Kong, Malaysia. Nigeria is also becoming a top country, raising from number 9 to number 7. United Arab Emirates, which is an interesting case because that is also becoming a hub country for international students. So United Arab Emirates is also a top exporting country to the UK, but is also becoming a top importing country for international students in United Arab Emirates. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and then further down, Thailand and South Africa. Obviously, I didn't talk about number 1 because that is the undisputed dominant country for undergrad students. That is, it has positives and negatives, and throughout this presentation, I'm going to be outlining the role of China and what this means for the UK. So that is the picture. So it's really the key things there, I think, is India driving the growth mainly, and some other countries that have also the potential to support the non-EU undergrad market. Now, I think the point I'm trying to make is that we need probably to look beyond the Brexit. So it's not simply the impact of Brexit on EU markets, but is how Brexit has added to this negative narrative and image of the UK as a destination country for international higher education, broadly speaking, not only undergrad, postgrad, but also research collaboration, and academic careers, and so on and so forth. Second, I think we need to analyze all this impact in the context of what is happening in other parts of the world, and especially considering countries that are becoming now destinations for international students. So we are rather inward looking, trying to analyze the UK as being the only player in the world, whereas now there are several other countries that are emerging as destination, as competitor countries, if you like. The third aspect there is obviously all the geopolitical developments, all the politics and economic agendas shape what we call the knowledge diplomacy agenda. So the internationalization and the flows of students and the kind of incentives that are going to be there or obstacles reflect the geopolitical developments. So that is also something to be considered, and not analyzing higher education in isolation to all the other parts, especially politics. The last point is Brexit, but also COVID, the gig economy, and a potential financial or economic crisis will influence the future model for the provision of higher education, which means that the flows of students may not be as before. So there may be new models of provision that are more blended, that involve an offshore delivery and at-home delivery. So going forward, we probably cannot continue projecting the future line, let's say, of mobility using the existing trajectory of that mobility. We need to rethink about what the new normal will be. So that is, if you like, as the contextual factors. So Brexit is only one of the many contextual factors out there. Now, trying to discuss some of these contextual factors, obviously the geopolitical aspect is quite broad and it's very difficult to discuss. The last point about the gig economy and about the impact of a potential financial economic crisis and COVID is something that is ongoing and is at the same time something that we cannot quantify quite a lot. So the point I would like to analyze a bit more is what is the relative position of the UK. So looking beyond Brexit and EU markets and focus on what is the position of the UK versus other countries that may emerge as destinations for international students in particular. So I've collected some data from UNESCO. The problem with the UNESCO data is that it's not very recent. So the latest available is 2018-19. At the same time, I would say this is a nice thing for our discussion, mainly because that does not include the impact of COVID. So I think that gives us a nice view of how things were, let's say, in a normal year. So what we see here is that's total students, total international students, including postgraduates and undergraduates, which is important because the majority of international students in the UK are postgrads. And what we see here is the ranking of countries as destinations of international students. In 2018 is the main ranking that I've used here from 1 to 20. And on the other columns, you see the ranking in the previous years. Now, the interesting thing here is the rise of Australia and Germany, quite close to the UK. The drop of some other countries like France, the, again, rise of non-traditional players like the United Arab Emirates, and also the rise of China. So these are the key points there. So you see that although the UK has been stable in the second position, there are countries that are emerging as destination countries for international students. Now, what is interesting here, this is the share of each country from the global international student market. So the United States, for instance, it has about 70% of the entire global market of international students. Now, the UK, as you can see, is in second position, but is gradually going down. So from 10% to 8% in 2018-19. And it's very close is Australia. So the two things there, two countries that we can say are on strong economies and traditional players. Germany and Australia are becoming very important. And then, of course, you have the drop in France. And then the other thing is that you have some other countries that are also experiencing a very high growth. So United Arab Emirates now around 4% of the global international student market. China growing quite substantially, just below 4%. So that tells us that there's more competition from different parts of the world. And that is really what impacts the higher education market. So if you add on top of that the impact of Brexit, let alone the impact on the regulatory side, that makes things more difficult, the impact on the reputation image of the country is by itself quite enough to create that negative trajectory in the in student mobility. Now, if we look at the growth of different, so what is the potential future trajectory of these mobility trends is that, so again, overall, I've tried to gather some data here from UNESCO. If we look at the growth of the entire market between 2008 and 2019, there was 68% altogether. So the entire mobile population of mobile students has gone up from about 3.5 million to 5.5 million. The growth in the second phase, if you like, the more recent phase, is been 32%. So I'm somehow comparing the growth in the total with the growth of the flows in each country. In orange, you see the countries where the growth has been below the overall, and in light green, you see the growth that has been above the overall. So you have some, so the United States and the UK are growing less than the overall, which means that if some countries are growing more than the overall, in some years, they are going to go above the UK and US. And interestingly enough, I think here by mistake, I've highlighted yellow, orange. So I think very important is, again, China growing at multiple times the overall. So you see it's almost 100% increase between the past 5 years. And some other countries as well, Turkey, United Arab Emirates. So there's a lot of countries that are experiencing this very high growth in the flows of international students. So other countries are catching up. Last point, and I'm just checking time, just want to make sure I'm not over my time. So from the previous slides, more competition, and there are clearly countries growing at a much faster rate than the UK. And that is problematic, mainly because these countries are not just a small player with, say, few thousands of students, but instead they are quite big players with hundreds of thousands of students. Now, and obviously we see a dominance of China there. Now, the dominance of China, which needs to be noted, is also visible on the research side. So this is data from Scopus, Saival, and this is the total publications. That's the total output. All types of publications. Mostly is academic, peer review academic articles. Between 2000 and 2020. So in the past 20 years, what has been the total output of publications per country? I've selected some countries here that, in relation to the previous slides, these are some of the key destination countries of international students. So what we see here is China is now the #1 country by output, by research output. Yes, I can hear you thinking that, yeah, that might not be good quality, but partly is the case, but it's not exactly the case. So some quality is there. Of course, they have not yet achieved the citation impact of countries, let's say, like the UK or the US, but the fact that they are driving the output and the fact that between 2004 and 2020, they have experienced so much growth, that is indicative of the capacity building that is taking place in that country. And going back to the slide where we saw that the main non-EU market, well, the main market overall for undergrads and for postgrads in the UK is China. If you consider the capacity building that is evident through the research output, there is the danger that at some point you will see that market declining or stagnating. The Chinese have been very, very good at using transnational education and international student mobility to develop the capacity of their country. And when they reach a certain state, then they throw in the mix some regulation that puts barriers into specific activities. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Now, another very interesting, and I think that is the last slide I have, is the international research collaboration. Now, on research, we know that any research that is co-authored by international authors produces more citations than a research authored only by one author or by authors in the same country. So if you collaborate with others who are international, your paper will get more citations. That is the overall finding by analyzing the different publications. So it's very important to have international research collaboration outputs because that drives quality of research. So the more collaboration you have with international authors, the more quality research output you get. Now, if you look at so what I've done here, that is the collaboration profile for UK. So if we take all the papers that are co-authored with international co-authors in the UK, that is the profile of the international co-authors. So the co-authors are coming from these countries. So the UK collaborates more with United States, second place, China, very important, and then other countries. With bold are countries from within the EU or broader, if you like, European Economic Community, I think. I think Switzerland is also there. So out of 20 top countries, the majority, I think 12 or 13, are from within the European Economic Area or EU. So very important role of the European countries in the international research collaboration, which explains why the government had to decide between Erasmus or Horizon 2020 or any future research calls from within the EU, and they went for participation in the European Union research programs. But I think what is also more interesting here is that in that columns, you see, first of all, on that final column, that is the field-weighted citation impact, which means that if is one, the paper receives the expected citations as the average papers in the same field. So say if I publish a paper and I get 100 citations and the average paper gets 100, then my field-weighted citation impact is 1. Obviously, the more above 1 you go, the more impactful and quality is considered your paper. So with China, obviously, you see that the field-weighted citation impact is lower than in other countries. So that is the aspect of quality that we talked about before, but it's there, it's not that far. What is interesting is these two columns show you the growth that has been experienced between the collaboration of the UK and each particular country in the co-authors. So if, let's say, we collaborate with China, what is the growth between UK-based researchers and China-based researchers in this collaboration, where we have more people participating year on year? So what this tells us is that in China, the UK is acting as a capacity building partner. So every year, if let's say there's 100 new publications, 34 or 35 new authors are from the UK and 50 new authors are from China. So it has a positive impact, more positive impact on the Chinese side than on the UK side. In contrast, with most of the European countries, the collaboration has a positive impact on the UK. So more ECRs, early career researchers go into the process of publishing internationally co-authored papers. So that is another qualitative difference between collaboration, research collaboration with EU countries and non-EU countries, and particularly China, that drives the research collaboration. So I think overall, the point I'm trying to make here is that EU countries are really valuable partners of the UK, especially on research. And I think, again, that explains why the UK government decided to establish some collaboration post-Brexit with the European Union on research. Non-EU countries are benefiting from the international research collaboration. So the UK is contributing the capacity building of these countries, which is fine. But the only thing is that some countries like China are becoming probably a bit too big and they need to be considered in that context. Brexit, as I said, is only one factor that explains all these developments. I think we need to broaden the scope of the evaluation of Brexit within this new world of higher education. So yeah, I think that's all I had. I hope I didn't take too much of your time. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Right, I've just unmuted myself, so thank you for that, Vangelis. We haven't actually got any open questions yet, so I'd encourage those who are viewing this presentation to submit some questions. We've got some time at the end, and what I'll invite everyone to do then is to answer the questions as they sort of come in. So actually what I'll do is without further ado, I'll move on to our next speaker, and I'll invite Almut Kaspari to give the next presentation. Almut leads the British Council Higher Education portfolio across the EU region, working with 24 country teams, European and UK stakeholders. She supports students' mobility and recruitment to the UK, internationalisation, higher education, and ensures alignment between the UK and the European sector developments and goals, and is particularly interested in what motivates European students to study in the UK and how motivations are changing now that the UK has left the EU, which of course is the sort of big change. Before joining the sort of British Council in January 2018, Almut worked in research and science management in the UK and Germany. Okay, Almut, without further ado, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you, Vangelis, for the context which you provided. That was perfect, especially the last slide about research collaborations. I thought really works well with what I'm going to talk about, because I'm going to focus on student recruitment to the UK. So student motivations for coming to the UK and how Brexit affects those. And I think that's where research collaborations really start. I mean, that's the seed I think we are planting, you know, in having those students in the UK. As Vangelis said, quite often they come as undergraduate students and then they stay and they do their postgraduate degrees, PhD degrees. They stay to work, or they have stayed to work, and then when they go home, they take those partnerships and collaborations home with them, and so it really is an ecosystem which has grown over the years, and I really think it essentially all starts with recruitment to the UK. So that's what I will be looking at a little bit more, and I will focus especially on the insights which we generate, and we do regular research into student considerations. We run an annual survey, which we call the Brexit temperature check. And we've done that in the last 2 years, and we're certainly going to do it again next year, because obviously it is particularly important at this point in time, because the students are now experiencing the changes they've only heard about a few years ago. So if we do it again, I mean, when we did it this year in February, March 21, it was students who didn't have to apply for visa yet, but they heard about it, they thought about it. But when we do it again next year, then obviously we'll be able to hear from the students who've had the experience of applying for visa for the first time. So it's very interesting to do this year on year. But that's just as a little bit of context from my side, and I'd like to go straight into my first slide. So we've seen that student numbers are declining, and obviously, you know, everything Vangelis showed us and talked about is absolutely correct. I still wanted to start with a bit of good news, and this is a slide which shows you European students, the percentage of European students who are considering studying at a university in the next 3 years. That's right at the top. 61% of European students are considering studying at any university. And then out of those, 30% are considering studying abroad outside of their home country. And then 15% are considering English-speaking markets. And that's obviously what we are interested in particular, because that's where we can then compare how the UK sits within that group of English-speaking markets. And what's interesting, and what's in a way could be really reassuring, that out of the European students who consider studying in an English-speaking market, 70% out of those students are considering the UK. So in terms of English-speaking markets, European students, by and large, want to go to the UK. And that's obviously something that's good news, because we've got something good to build on. I mean, the interest is there. Students want to come. When they consider studying abroad, when they think about English-speaking markets, the UK is very important for them. The UK isn't always their top choice. That's what you see the right at the bottom. And for some reason, the number is missing. It's 4%. but that's to do with how European students go about making their decisions. They don't just go for one country. Unlike other parts of the world, they really look at a multitude of countries, and they take a long time choosing, selecting, and so on. So it's not surprising not to see one country coming out with a very strong percentage as top choice. That's not surprising, but what is really good and something to build on is this really strong consideration for the UK. And that's not changed year on year. As I said, we've been doing this Brexit temperature check for 2 years now. That's not changed at all. And that's obviously really reassuring. It's not changed with the Brexit changes, and it's also not changed with COVID. Now, a bit more about why European students want to come to the UK. What do they recognise the UK higher education system for? And you can see the different columns here. And I just need to move my the pictures a little bit. So you can see we've looked at course quality. We've looked at culture, so the culture within the UK. We've looked at cost factors, employment, the employment value of the UK degree for students, and we've looked at COVID-19 this year. And the UK is doing extremely well when it comes to quality of education. So students rate the UK really highly for its education quality. They rate the UK really highly for the value of a UK degree for employment. And they also rate the UK highly for its response to COVID-19. And I should say, and I will have a separate slide on that, they rate UK universities highly for their response to COVID-19. They are very clear in distinguishing between government and country risks and how the universities respond to the pandemic. And that's obviously really reassuring again, you know, that they are very clear about that distinction. Culture also UK in second place. That's obviously not a bad result either, but then you see that the UK drops down into third place, and that's something I will come back to throughout this presentation, because obviously costs, they are the negative factor which is putting students off from coming to the UK. And that's also in this slide, also take some time to look at the competitors, which Vangelis has mentioned too. I mean, you've got the United States in first position for student recruitment. You've also got the United States in second position for research outputs, but you've got it in first position as research collaborator of the UK. So the United States is one of the key competitors. The UK is doing better for European students compared with the United States, but the UK isn't doing better compared with Netherlands and Germany, the EU competitors for costs and culture. And European competitors are also catching up, as you can see from the percentages. And that's something really we will need to monitor over the coming years, because I really think European students are extremely mobile. They want to go and study abroad, as you've seen in the previous slide. They prefer mobility within the European continent. And therefore, if you've got strong competitor countries within Europe, then they're probably going to be the ones who are going to benefit from changes that happen in the UK. Again, just to show quality of teaching, how important that is for European students when they think about where to study. And this slide shows you that it's the quality of universities and the quality of teaching which students value in particular, and where the UK comes first. But you can also see, just coming back to the competitor point, that Germany is catching up in terms of both quality of institutions and quality of teaching. This is from a different survey we've done. We've run some focus groups with European students, and I've added it just to give you a flavor of other aspects they're thinking about and they're discussing when they're thinking about studying in the UK. they choose the UK primarily for quality of education, yes. They choose it for the global value of the UK degree, employability, yes, but they also choose it because they want to be exposed to the English language. They want to be embedded in an English-speaking environment. They want to gain fluency in English. That's a really important factor to them. And another important factor is that it is close to home. So geographical proximity matters to European students. As I said, they really like to travel, but they like to travel within the European continent. And that's also something I think going forward with all the changes we are likely to see in terms of traveling, also beyond the pandemic. I think that's a really important point. And then on the right-hand side, you can see some differences between European countries. So cultural factors were higher for Italy and France, prospective students from those countries. In Spain, it's particularly the teaching methods and the small groups, that it's discussion-based, that's something Spanish students pick up on and compare with their home education systems. And students in Greece and Germany were both more likely than other students to mention quality of education. But as you've seen, overall, that's a really important factor. Rankings matter to European students, and the quality of the institutions is really important. I wanted to just share this with you. I've mentioned it already, to see how COVID has, or if COVID has had an impact on European students. It has, in the sense that they really took a lot of time to research how universities are approaching the COVID and what measures they've put in place. They want to be informed. But they also recognize that while the risk is higher, perhaps in the UK than in some of the other European countries, you can see at the bottom of this table that the UK and the United States are both in red when it comes to COVID risks. So it's a high COVID risk, higher COVID risk than in Netherlands and Germany. But they are rated highly for the quality of online teaching, where face-to-face teaching wasn't possible. And also how safe students are made to feel by the universities and the blended offers. So that's something where UK universities can take some reassurance from, that they're really, that European students really appreciate the offer they've put together. They also say, though, European students, and this is something from other surveys, that they really prefer face-to-face. I mean, online when it needs to be, but otherwise they really want to go back to on campus and face-to-face. Okay, so this was the bit about looking at the good news and why students still consider the UK, want to come to the UK. The bad news, obviously, Vangelis went through the details. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I mean, just to share with you, in January, sorry, this is a mistake, in January, no, this is right, I just wanted to have it the other way around. So we saw a 40% drop by February, and that already was bad. Then we saw a 43% drop by June, and now we've seen an even bigger drop when we had the acceptance numbers back from UCAS in September. That was a 56% drop for confirmed places, and these are the places which the universities have confirmed to European students. So obviously we don't know yet how that's going to translate into enrollment numbers. And from what we're hearing in European countries, where my colleagues are in touch with students, or students are getting in touch with them because they've got an offer, but they realize in some cases what the fees are, and they say they can't afford it. So they're not, some of them can't take up the offer which they've got. So the expectation is that enrollment numbers might go down even further. And the expectation also is that we probably have not reached the bottom yet, simply because we also have, amongst those European students which we're talking about, we also have students who have still settled status in the UK, who are in the UK, EU nationalities, and have applied for settled status, which gives them different access to fees and so on. So once that group of students is reduced, that might also affect numbers again. So it's still not really, we can't be entirely sure how the picture is going to develop. It will recover a little bit. I doubt it will go back to the numbers we've seen before. But I mean, just to say, and this is something Vangelis said already, obviously at the moment, the picture is quite bleak. It is not something, and that's also, that also came out really clearly from Vangelis' numbers, it is not something which needs to worry universities by and large economically at this stage, because the international student numbers have even gone up. So there are universities which depend a lot more on European students. So then obviously they are put in a very difficult position. But if you look at the sector as a whole, then obviously with international student numbers going up, it's not overall just a negative picture. But I still think that the downward trend in European student numbers is something universities need to think about very carefully, whether or not they depend on European students economically. And I'll say a bit more about that later. I just wanted to pull out again in terms of UCAS numbers, this map, which is from UCAS. And I think it's, it just shows, it just brings it so much into focus what's happening. Essentially, we are going back to a situation pre-1990, if you like. If you look at this map, you can see the countries in blue are the countries where we see the biggest drop in students going to the UK. And those are obviously the Eastern European countries. The countries in greyish brown are the countries with a decline too, but much less of a decline. Ireland, the only country where there's growth. That's obviously a very different story, but I mean, just really to say that if this trend continues, then UK universities will recruit from Western and Northern European countries or old EU countries, and the new accession states will more or less be left out. And that's, I think, as a long-term engagement strategy with European higher education partners, I think that's problematic too. But I might be able to say a bit more about that later. So are students really not coming to the UK because of Brexit is a question obviously we want to find out. So is that downward trend? What causes it? Is it, what are the reasons for it? And this is what this slide brings together a little bit. So the main reason why students aren't coming to the UK, are not considering the UK, I should say, is because living in the UK is too expensive, fees are too high. So that's obviously both of these, or the second at least, is clearly linked to Brexit, because it meant for European students that they now have to pay international fees. The thing about life and culture doesn't appeal, that seems to be softening a little, and that's what the box in blue says. So last year, 37% of students said they don't come to the UK because it doesn't appeal to them anymore because of Brexit. Now that's gone down to 29%. So I think my reading of this is that students, by and large, are getting used to the idea that the UK is now outside of the European Union, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it is less welcoming to international students and so on, or European students. So that's a positive. But what they also realise much more concretely than they realised before is what that means, what the EU exit means in terms of fees and costs. And so in a way, the reality is that costs are so much higher now, and it's just getting too expensive for a lot of them. And so in a way, even if life and culture appeal a bit more again, if the cost factor is now so clear and stark, I guess, you know, that's what probably matters a lot more to European students. Yes, and this is a nice quote which I took from the very recent report, London Economics report, on the economic benefit of international students to the UK. It's a fantastic piece of work. If anyone is interested in that sort of thing, I recommend looking at it, because it really details every constituency within the UK, and you can see the benefit to your constituency from international students. But what's also really important, and this is the quote, that yes, of course, we need to focus on the economic benefits to the institution, to the places, and to the country. But there is so much beyond that, and the non-economic benefits are just as important. And Vivian Stern, Nick Hillman, in the introduction, they say better learning environments, greater soft power, more diverse campuses are some of the non-economic benefits. In short, we would not have the excellent higher education sector that we do if it were not for the very valuable financial and non-financial contributions of students and staff from around the world. And I think that's something, again, just coming back to you, Vangelis, but I think that's exactly what you touched on in your presentation as well. And that's also something I would just like to reflect on a little bit more, and maybe it's also something we can talk about, think about in the conversation. I think the students UK universities were attracting from European countries were often extremely well qualified students. The acceptance rates for European students are as good as domestic students, and that's for international students, that's almost unheard of. And some countries stand out. In particular, Bulgaria had extremely high acceptance rates, and that's also why I think, you know, if we don't, if UK universities aren't careful and sort of leave out completely the Eastern European market, I really think that will be in the long term detrimental to the quality of students they can attract long term. I mean, these countries are dynamic countries, and a lot is going to happen in that part of the European Union, not least because the European Union and Commission is interested in investing in those countries. And I think with the quality and the ambition and also the school system they have, very often it's an extremely interesting school system where you have very specialized, almost elite schools in certain areas, engineering or science, technology, or also the arts. So you can attract from state schools extremely well educated, qualified students, and that's what UK universities have been able to do in the past. So I think that's really something universities will be losing out as well, obviously, as diversity on campus. And that's not just in terms of socializing and the student life, but that's important to students. They talk about that, they talk to their peers, and they want to hear what it's like living in the UK, what life on campus is like, and they want to mix with other students from all around the world, yes, but also they want to mix with different cultures. And if it becomes a very monocultural campus where you've got UK and China, India, that's going to be less attractive to European students too, and that will affect courses that are offered by universities and so on. It really has, those things have a knock-on effect on attraction for future European students. European students, by and large, are extremely loyal to the UK, and I think that's also something we've seen in the Brexit context, that they really were hurt and felt rejected by the decision. They all have been to the UK. Many of them have been to the UK for language courses, as part of school exchange, as part of work placements, all of the things that were part of Erasmus as well, and which are now going to be much more difficult. And those are areas, I think, where the UK as a country and the sector really needs to also be very careful in finding ways and ensuring that will continue to happen. And then, as Vangelis said, the quality of research is obviously depends on those relationships which grow when students come to the UK and then take those relationships home with them. And I've added another area here, knowledge security, which I think is already obviously very important, but I think will become even more important, that students are from certain countries are being screened when they want to take up certain courses in the UK. And again, that's something where there's much closer alignment between European countries and the UK. So in that area as well, I really think it's important that UK universities don't forget the European market, because I think in the longer term, it will be a market where they can collaborate, cooperate, recruit students from much more easily, also for the subject areas where there might be knowledge security issues, such as, you know, nuclear power, engineering, and so on. So those are just a few points I wanted to make to really emphasize that those links and connections with European countries will remain extremely important for the UK, even if in the shorter term, it might seem as if European students aren't really needed for the economic benefit of universities. I'll skip that slide. That's Vangelis, you've talked about that much better than I could. And I just wanted to say two things, which I think are really important. If universities do those two things, then that will help a lot already. And that's the first one is really talk to European students as much as you can. European students are driven by information. They want to know as much as they can. They perhaps, unlike other parts of the world, and we are seeing this through the campaigns we are doing, they engage very differently. They engage through information, they engage through conversation, they engage through hearing from students, but they also want to hear from universities directly. When it is about postgraduate students, they want to have the contact with the academics. They prefer emails or a direct call, chat only when it's really people. So they want to hear from people. And they're very happy for universities. They're very happy with the contact they have with universities. They always emphasize how good universities are with staying in touch, much better than their universities at home. But that's really something I think if universities can build on that. And then the second really important remedy, obviously, is funding. And that's something I know universities are thinking about. All of you are thinking about that. There's a range of different offers available, and we try to promote those to European students. Some universities have introduced scholarships. Some have introduced transition bursaries. Some have opened their international scholarships to now include European students. All of this is extremely welcome, and we want to help universities to promote that to European students so that the information is out there. I also think we are in a bit of a curious situation at the moment that we do have national scholarship schemes or national funding schemes for international students, Chevening I'm thinking of, and also the Red Scholarship Scheme. But both national funding schemes at the moment don't include European students. And that's obviously a bit of a curious situation if you think that they're now also included in that group of high fee payers, but don't have access to the same level of national funding schemes. And that's definitely something I think we all combined, the sector and then obviously sector bodies. And we are certainly also making the case for European students to be included in national funding schemes. But those two things I would really recommend universities to go out there and talk to the students and not keep those relationships warm and make sure that those relationships continue even if the immediate economic benefit isn't always there, and then to ensure that you have ways of supporting European students so that it is attractive for them and that the cost hurdle isn't quite so high, because obviously they compared with their markets and they by and large don't have to pay any fees in their home countries or in neighboring countries who they're equally happy to travel to when they're thinking about study abroad. So it really is important that those two things are looked at. And I think I will leave it at that, but I'm obviously happy if there's so much else we could say, you know, I mean, Erasmus touring, that's another totally different field. We could talk about that for an hour too. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Art. Unfortunately, of course, we don't have
yeah, sorry.
Time is getting tight. So what I'll do without, again, further ado, is to introduce Les. Les, who's a sort of a regular attender at these events and is the sort of professor of regional economy at the Department of Public Leadership and Social Enterprise, also known as PULSE, and the director of the Space and Exploration and Analysis Research program at the Open University Business School. As well as being a visiting professor for the Centre of Brexit Studies. So if you want to know anything about space, then Les is your man. As probably sort of gleaned from that, he's an economist, internationally known for his work on regional and urban economics in the context of changing economic governance, including place-to-place leadership. There's a whole lot of other things I can say about Les, but I think I'd prefer Les to actually sort of speak for himself. And but that's just fair. We worked together on a book about Northern Ireland, which we published 2 years ago, talking about the sort of the dangers of the border, which of course has never been truly resolved. But that's another matter. Over to you, Les.
Thanks very much, Steve. Let me just try and share this and. Trying to get a full screen on this, Steve. It's
I'm not sure how to assist. I mean, there's normally a button down the bottom right-hand corner that you hit. Is that not available?
No.
I mean, we can, it's clear anyway, so we can see what's there.
Okay.
So
no, if you go, sorry, Les, but I had the same issue earlier. If you go into display settings,
yeah,
and then if you go down and there's one duplicate slideshow, if you click on that, I think it should be fine.
Thanks. Come to the rescue.
Yeah.
Gosh.
I had the same issue. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Almut.
Right. Thanks. Two very previous and detailed presentations. Firstly, I would say that senior management of higher education institutions in the UK should invite Almut to give that presentation. And a point about conversation, well, German philosopher Hegel said knowledge proceeds by critical conversation, but I will make some trenchant remarks about the degree of deafness amongst senior HE managers in this country. So all I've done here is put a set of, it's only 2 slides, and I will try and cut it a bit short, Steve, so that we can get some Q&A in. So first, and they're obviously not as detailed, but I want to do it in the context of the UK HE model. So firstly, the impacts obviously in students, research and staff, but there's, as Almut pointed out and Vangelis, there's kind of quite almost profound cultural underpinnings, which are non-quantitative, which are quite crucial. And the size of the sector in 2018-19, there's details the number of students, number of staff, and how the percentage from the EU and outside the EU. 37 is income. Now there's a whole dispute about what actually universities contribute, because the government figures for 2016 were 34 billion contribution to GDP, but that's just universities. The total estimate includes transnational education and all HE-related activities. That's from Higher Education Statistics Agency. But again, you know, data always tells you stories, which I liked about the last 2 presentations. But I'm always skeptical about certain claims that are made. So, you know, that's actually means that between the 2 figures, that the universities contributes between about 1.2% of GDP to nearly 5%. Now, the losses due to Brexit, the estimated loss of fee income is for 2018-19 was 62.5 million, 57% in EU student enrollments, and about 8% of EU academic staff. But what's tended to overlook in a lot of these calculations is and it relates to Erasmus, which I'll come on to as an issue, is that the fees that UK students could pay to enroll at other European universities. Now, Germany has no fees now, but for foreign students, it's 1,500 euros a semester. And Netherlands, it's about 2,000. Now, Ireland's interesting because that's for non-EU students, it's full tuition fees, depending on the subject, which range for business and humanities, social science between 10,000 euros and 20,000 euros, but for medicine between 40 and 55,000. Now, there are temporary arrangements, and at the moment, because of the common travel area, there's still negotiation about the fee structure. So again, it will be interesting to, there's not one transition, but there seems to be several. And as we have seen from recent events, you could call this a kind of whirling dervish government as it spins around to each successive crisis. And I said Brexit, in terms of increased transaction costs, is a gift that just keeps on giving, but to the detriment to all citizens, including students. So I just want to come on to the issues. There's obviously the Bologna process is continuing, but again, this kind of visceral, I've recently read Chris Book's excellent book on Brexit. And the problem is his analysis is that basically you've got a campaigning government, not a governing government with regard to Brexit. And there's kind of almost visceral hatred of anything other European, not knowing our history and not knowing, what it is supposed to be English, and I stress English. I mean, given our language is basically rooted in French, German, and Hindi. So the exceptionalism of the English is not really founded in even its the way its language is constructed. And my concern is the Bologna process, which universities have signed up to, and Bologna Masters, which our university signed up to, may go. And again, that relates to the relative prices of tuition. Now, if we go to Horizon funding, the next funding period is up to 2027, which we're still part of, and which has been important for networking, collaboration, and the sort of the benefits of joint cultures, and particularly, a shared European history. I mean, the great thing about the EU, apart from the shame of the Balkans, is for the last 60 years it's avoided conflict. And for a region of the world that sees itself as civilized, it is extraordinary that the Europeans try to kill each other in millions or billions in the last 2 centuries. And that's something that's been really important. And it's been really important for the political progress of countries like Greece, Spain, and Portugal that had dictatorships. And that's been the basis of political modernization. And Tsiligiris, the Greek composer, died when I was in Crete, and he went to jail for his beliefs during the period of the colonels. So someone like him in his later years must have been, really pleased about Greece being part of, if you like, the community of Europe. Now, the problem with the post-funding is that and Brexit. So I do a lot of work with the European Space Agency, of which the UK is a member. Now, the UK Space Agency is not an EU body, but if you want to bid for contracts, you, as a third country, you do not get privileged access to that. So the latest national space strategy by the UK has Copernicus as one of its key programs to contribute to, but in fact, UK science institutions, UK-based companies will not be able to bid for the primary contracts. So there's a variability there to do with Brexit. And we've left Galileo, which was the new, well, is the GPS system of EU, again on kind of visceral, almost xenophobic ground, saying we're going to be the world masterclass or whatever. And again, that degree of research culture and collaboration shows in the very fast rollout of vaccines by Oxford University, but in Belgium and other EU countries. And if you actually look at the composition of the science teams, that again, that's quite crucial. And it's and different kind of intellectual academic formations are really important, not only for students, but also for the whole kind of research culture. So I've been working closely with some Italian colleagues at the Open University. And I have to say our department in the last 10 years has really gained from employing some excellent other European colleagues who've actually contributed to my development as an academic, particularly in place-based leadership. We go to the issue of I've called it the global Britain Turing replacement for Erasmus. And that's 35,000 students per year, but not only from higher education, but further education, schools, and further contributions. In Erasmus, the UK sent 17,000 students in 2019. 32,000 students came from the EU. Now, but the cultural, reputational and social capital of Brexit, and obviously magnified by COVID, and a kind of prevailing culture of increased xenophobia, which the English seem to indulge in from time to time, is damaging to universities. The loss of funding actually damages the creation of social capital, particularly in science teams. And organizations like ESA have actually created multinational teams. They've also, in their contribution to the Artemis lunar program, there's 10 European countries involved in building the service module for the Orion satellites. That's actually created a knowledge network, but a way of working together that's particularly generated social capital. So those kind of things. But let's just come on to my trenchant remarks. One of the perverse outcomes, it seems to me, of Brexit is possibly solving the broken higher education model in the UK, and which maybe is sometimes a dialogue with us. We've had increased fees, increased cost of student loans recently announced, casualisation, pay cuts, reduction in pensions, and promoting intergenerational inequality. So if you want younger and newer academics to come out of the international students who study here from UK universities, you need to do something about that. You've also got senior HE management that pays themselves large sums of money, which could be seen as part of a rentier class, where they're just driven by, if you like, bums on seats fees, and becoming property developers where they can charge large costs of accommodation. And that is a worry. And consequently, 13 out of 140 HE institutions are currently near bankruptcy. Now, whether the latest proposals for changes in higher education will, I think, reduce the quality, the cultural attraction, all the things that we want to do to make this campuses an attractive place for particularly EU students, but for other non-EU students, and making a contribution to the quality of life that universities have always contributed in the UK. Now, interestingly, and that, I think, that Stern and Hillman quote that Almut gave is actually quite crucial. But what I found interesting, again, in terms of the HE management model, is that in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and blended learning, there's a great deal of variability in the quality, where some managements have been recording aging lecturers like me of their lectures so they can actually just repeat them again. Blended learning is costly, it takes a lot of commitment and it's a lot of resources. And the Open University has been doing it for 51 years. And I think there's a lot to learn from that. I think also, frankly, the British Council model that used to be where you could walk in and access information could also be an important partnership, particularly in the doing something about regional inequality in the UK and some of the core cities. My final point, though, and I think it reinforces both previous speakers, is that higher education and universities only work on a collegiate, collaborative and cooperative model. And the membership of EU institutions, the influx of international students, both within the EU and outside, has actually reinforced that. And yet the current model seems to be going completely the other way. So I think, like Brexit, in terms of increasing transaction costs that doesn't stop giving, there's a real danger of the HE model doing that and actually making the UK less attractive as a destination for international students post-Brexit. Thanks very much.
Hang on. Right, I've unmuted myself. Okay, I'm actually just looking. Unfortunately, we haven't actually had any questions yet. So I think we've got, certainly if the event ends at 10:30, a few minutes discussion. So I tend to try and sort of sum up, what do we draw from all of that? Because I'm obviously very much in alignment with Les's analysis. HE has become, I don't know, an arm of business. And again, that came out very much in Albert's presentation. And indeed, of course, also in sort of Vangelis's, the idea that international students, wherever they come from, and ideally, if you can charge them as much as possible, that they become a method, if you like, of supporting sort of the machinery. Again, I just wonder if you want to address that. Again, that follows on from what you've just said, Les. Oh, everyone seems to be muted. Can I invite the panelists to unmute themselves?
Yeah, I thought you were asking Vangelis that question.
So no, well, it was a general for all of you that again, because I grew up, dare I say, in sort of the 1970s, where education was seen to be sort of something that was free for all. You know, let's face it, and I suspect Les also availed this. We went to university and it didn't cost us a penny. In fact, they gave us money in terms of grants to encourage it, so that the nature of education has changed. I would very much like to go back to a situation where, of course, that return, and indeed as part of it, although I suspect it won't happen anytime soon, where, of course, we could sort of freely travel anywhere in the world to sort of be educated, because I think the more that we can reduce the boundaries, if not sort of completely ignore them, the better. Again, I leave that as an open sort of comment and stroke question.
Well, I mean, obviously, it's trenchant in my views. I mean, the worry is that the increase in income and wealth inequality in the UK and regional inequality, the education model reinforces that. I mean, student debt. I mean, medicine will become the preserve of, wealthier middle class students. And if you actually look at the cuts in nursing grants, and nurses are crucial, we've seen that. And the other thing is the 92 Higher Education Act, the Board of Governors often are now actually full of hedge fund managers who look at, so the OUs, we don't on the OU, but our annual £500 million turnover a year, and they say, oh, well, you're running a turnover of £500 million. You should pay yourself large sums of money. Or frankly, I think the support staff should be paid large sums of money, like Georgia, because without them, the place doesn't work. and the value added is actually in the academics, but also the, it's also about the next generation. Should you discourage opportunity for students of all backgrounds to participate? So I think you talk about leveling up, but we've had a leveling down of opportunities, and I think a number of the so-called elite universities have been complicit in that.
Yeah.
No, I
Yeah,
agree.
but,
If I add to that, I agree. I think there's some conflicting objectives there, and usually the concepts like widening participation and reducing inequality are used by most universities as headline items rather than real projects that happen on the ground. It's simply as a ticking boxing exercise. I think broadly speaking, what we have been experiencing is this move of public debt to private debt when it comes to the funding of higher education. So there's been this obsession of governments to make their books look good. And therefore, we had the introduction of student loans. And always there's been this drive to make sure that there's not any impact on the student, on the public financing when it comes to higher education funding. So I think if we continue on that trajectory, soon we're going to hit a point where higher education will continue to be commercialized, and there's going to be a range of problems linked into that. I think there was a question that was posted that said there seem to be many lecturer jobs at threat. How does this affect the quality going forward? I think what happens in relation to that is that this commercialization of higher education has created a marketplace for teaching staff that somehow replicates what happens in other parts of the economy, like probably fast foods is not the best example, but it looks like that. So it appears like that. So especially for early career researchers, early career staff, now they face a situation where they are being given short-term contracts, hourly paid contracts. So I think, yes, this does affect the quality. And I think, as Leslie said, and you, Steve, we are reaching a point where this is becoming very evident, these conflicting objectives and the realities of higher education on the ground. So yeah, I think in the next couple of years, we will have to face that situation, and this is going to escalate even further, I think.
And if I could just one last comment on the commercial aspect of UK higher education. That's obviously something which is very alien to European students, because that's something, and that's also come up in our presentations, but that's not something they're used to. Most of them are used to not paying fees at all, or very little fees, and it comes with a package of a promotional package. It also comes with a support package, which they really appreciate. But if you pay fees, the expectations from European students are so much higher, and the promotional work that comes with it alienates a lot of them. And I think that's when we are having those conversations with European students, we need to be very careful. We can't approach them in the same way in which we would approach students from countries where they're used to a commercial education offer. That's something I find with a lot of the work. I see a lot of the campaigns that are out there to reach European students. When we use the same messages, they don't work, because that's not how they want to be spoken to, or how they're used to be spoken to in that promotional way. That's not what they have in their home countries. And so we just need to be aware that that's a real difference between the European student population and other parts of the world.
Okay, I mean, we've picked up on the sort of the one question. Again, what does the future hold? I suppose that the answer must be more of the same. The hope is amongst some of us that eventually there will be some sort of return to the EU, and we'll get back to the state of affairs that used to exist up until only sort of a year and a half ago. But unfortunately, I don't see that happening anytime soon. But any views about the give us some optimism about the future and sort of, in particularly with regard to sort of to cooperation with HEs. In fact, if I start with you, Almut.
Difficult. Difficult. What does the future hold? Perhaps I should just start with my my hope for the future. I mean, I can't, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't really know how it's going to pan out. But my hope for the future is that UK universities will continue to reach out to a wide range of European students and won't just limit their interest to a few markets, to the most promising markets, to maybe the markets where they know students can afford it. I really hope they bear in mind that there's going to be developments from all across the region, and there will be growth in areas and parts of Europe where we don't have it now, and that they keep those doors open and converse with students in a very informative and transparent and straightforward way, and that they will also have, with national support, the funding in place, which will allow students to come who could otherwise not afford it. And then hopefully we'll have a sustainable student base, European student base in the UK, which will not be what we had before, but will be sustainable to really keep those research collaborations going, which we need for the higher education, for the quality sector we have now. And that's really what I worry about, that if numbers stay as low as they are now, that I think long-term it will affect the quality of the sector as we know it now.
Okay, thank you, Alma. Vangelis?
Yeah, I think as we have authored previously with Alex, the encouraging thing is that internationalization and collaboration in higher education is driven by institutions. So that has not changed. So is that universities by design and in their nature, they have this internationalization component in their DNA. So no matter what the political framework is or the regulatory framework is, there's always going to be this drive for internationalization. And we see evidence of that, even that after Brexit, still UK universities are doing quite a lot of work, and they are planning a lot of work in Europe and with European counterparts. So that I think is one part. The second part, and the most important one that reflects, I think, to what both of the other speakers said, is that what is going to be important going forward is for UK universities to recognize that really the new innovative position is to understand that it's not only about numbers, it's really about quality and about refocusing on what the objectives of the new world that we are facing are. So it's not longer let's educate as many people as we can and get out as much money as we can, but it's mostly about what is our position as a university for the regional economy, what is our position to support widening participation locally, and at the same time, what is our position in the world as a global enterprise, and how we support sustainability and other aspects of that global citizenship agenda. And I think it is impossible to meet those under this existing drive of commercialization and more numbers and expansion and so on and so forth, because that is a distraction, I think, for universities, especially in the UK. So that is, I think, what is going to be quite important going forward, and that will shape the future, either on the one way or the other way.
Thank you, Vangelis. And Les, I'll allow you to sort of to have the last word on this.
But I thoroughly agree with both Almut and Vangelis, particularly about institutional cooperation, of which there's some. I mean, the Open University sees itself as a social institution with a strong commitment to social inclusion and social justice. And I think that expands beyond our borders. And I think the point about setting up partnerships, particularly in Central Eastern Europe. I mean, particularly, I always love traveling to cities in Central Eastern Europe, and that's sort of part of the culture. I think the regional aspects is really important. I mean, it did remind me that when Thatcher scrapped the metropolitan regions, they collaborated together to set up an office in Brussels to deal directly with the EU. So even though we're out of the EU, it seems to me that if the institutions want to realize social justice, social inclusion, wider participation, they perhaps collaborate amongst themselves more and with other institutions in the rest of the EU in order to sustain, the reputational capital and the social capital that's been built. But whether they'll have, I mean, it's extraordinary because it's a sales maximization model where you actually don't get competition because you have fixed fees. I mean, it's the ideology is different, and that contradiction, I hope, would lead to greater collaboration. And although I'm a skeptic, it is about the younger generation in a bigger world. And again, I think the whole concern about climate change and COVID-19 and that cooperation could be a very good basis for achieving some of the objectives that Vangelis and Alma have talked about. But thanks very much.
Okay. Right. Well, we've had no more questions, so I think probably this is a good point to draw the sort of this event to a close. So I'd like to thank the sort of three speakers, Almut, Vangelis, and Les, for the sort of the really insightful and really informative presentations they've made. Yeah, it's a really complex area, and it's one which, of course, is sadly a victim of the sort of the continuing disruption that sort of Brexit causes to sort of the economy and wider society and our relationships with our closest European neighbours. And I'm sure that we'll see it develop even further in coming months and years. Okay, I'm Steven McCabe, Dr Steven McCabe, Senior Fellow of the Centre of Brexit Studies. So on behalf of everyone involved here today, I wish you all a good day. Again, I would remind you that sort of the video recording of this presentation will be available, and invite you to sort of to participate in future events organised by the Centre for Brexit Studies. So as I say, have a good day, and hopefully again see you all soon. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.